Okay, welcome everybody to the Saratoga Whiskey Club. This is tasting number 104 for the club, so it's pretty exciting. We're moving along here rather quickly in 2022. It's kind of fun. We're doing almost tastings every week now, which is kind of crazy. Keeps me busy, that's for sure. But we have a special guest with us tonight to talk about a newer line of whiskey that is in the United States. Pretty exciting. We're pretty big fans of Japanese whiskey and specifically rice whiskey. So we're really excited to taste some of these special bottles tonight. But with us tonight is Nicholas. I don't know if you go by Nick or Nicholas.
I use the Sunday name, but doesn't matter. We're all friends here,
Okay,
so whatever you want.
Nicholas Polacki, is that right? Polacki?
Nailed it.
All right, there we go. I didn't ask him beforehand. I probably should have, but I went for it. So he's joining us tonight. He is a co-owner and the head of world or global whiskey for Shibui. So we're gonna go through the Shibui line tonight and taste our way through 7 different expressions from Shibui. We're gonna start with 3 that are global. And Rebecca, where are you going? And then we're gonna do 4 single grains to end with. So pretty special whiskey tonight. And so yeah, Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us. They did send us a couple of bottles, which is great to help us keep the cost of this tasting down, which is nice. And super excited to explore these whiskeys. I have tasted a few of them already and they're great. So looking forward to sharing this with the club. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to everybody for giving me your evening. I greatly appreciate it. Tasting 104, look at that. Fantastic. Congratulations. It's great that you've got such a great turnout as well every time you do a tasting. So first of all, thank you for not butchering my name as well. Polacki is my last name, which always throws people because I am a Scotsman with an Italian last name slinging Japanese whiskey. So, how did we get here is usually the question. So I'll start with that, Racket. Yeah. And I live in New Jersey, which is pretty great because having an Italian last name and living in New Jersey, but with this accent is always a conversation starter. I need to explain to lots of people that Scotland is closer to Italy than Brooklyn is. So there's a lot of Scottish Italians, especially in Glasgow and the area that I grew up in. And I don't get the dark skin and the good looks. I got a big nose and a last name no one can pronounce. So that's always fun. But you did an outstanding job there, Charles. So I appreciate that. So first and foremost, I'll walk you through who I am, just so that we get the formalities out of the way. My name's Nicholas Polacki. I have worked in the whiskey industry for over 20 years. I'm born and raised in a town called Dumbarton in Scotland, which is famous for a handful of small things. First of all, it used to be the home of the largest grain whiskey distillery in the world. So Ballantyne's Distillery was on my, literally no more than a mile from my doorstep when I grew up as a child. And all of Pernod Ricard's warehousing is still massively spread out across this town. So it was a whiskey town that I grew up in, really influential part of my upbringing. And the only other thing to come out of Dumbarton was David Byrne from the Talking Heads. So if anybody's a Talking Heads fan, look him up. He came out of my hometown. And outside of that, there you go, John. Glad to see you're a fan. Outside of that, there's Nicholas Polacki, the third most famous thing to come out of Dumbarton. So now you know. Tick the trifecta box. And it's I grew up like I said with the sounds and smells of distilleries on my doorstep. I used to work globally for Macallan, Highland Park and Glenrothes in Scotland, and then so I was based in Scotland, but I worked all over the world. I then moved out to the United States in 2010 to work for Balvenie, look after that brand, which was an absolute treat and a joy. And then in 2012, I started my own companies. I consulted with about 120 different whiskies from around the world. I met my business partners at that time. It's Lauren and Rachel Simmons. Lauren and I actually launched Nika Japanese whiskey into the United States in 2013, 2014, when nobody wanted to drink Japanese whiskey. And I was consulting with Berry Brothers and Rudd. I am a keeper of the Quaich back in Scotland. I'm also a contributor on CNBC to talk about rare whiskey as an alternative investment. So you'll see me popping up in the telly from time to time. And outside of that, I love whiskey. I love all things whiskey. I do not discriminate about any whiskies. I will try every whiskey I can get my hands on to try. I enjoy the flavors and the excitements of it. I enjoy some of the disappointments that you get along the way. But basically, that is the most fun thing I could ever spend my time doing, is sit down and sharing whiskey with people. So I'm delighted that we get to do that this evening.
Charles, this must be your brother.
Brother from another mother.
Exactly.
Yes, we have whiskey in our veins. That's for sure.
It courses through them. I'm actually 142 years old. I've just pickled all my organs, and that's why. That's it. So I'll start. You guys all have your tasting mats in front of you. So first and foremost, I'm going to get you drinking whiskey, and then I'll start to talk about it. Otherwise, it's going to be real boring while you just sit there and listen to me talk for the next 25, 30 minutes. So let's start with Grain Select. So Grain Select, this is, you guys should all have a little pour down on this. So let me walk you through a little bit about what we do, what's in the glass, and then we'll start to talk about why we do what we do when we start to talk about world blending and things. So Grain Select for us, let's just get into the absolutely nitty-gritty details. First and foremost, with everything that I do with Shibui and the teams that I work with in Japan, I'm really into transparency. It was embedded into me working with Macallan that you could start to talk really intimately about everything that you do with whiskey if you just tell everybody all the parts of the process. And people really respect that, and they want to know what's in the glass. In Scotland, we've done a really, really good job of promoting our whiskies worldwide. You can throw a stone from where you are and probably hit a Scotch whisky ambassador. You'll knock over Simon Brooken or hit one of the other likely lads when they're kind of doing the tour, and that's what we do, right? You can probably count in one finger if you've ever met anybody from Japan or working on a Japanese brand that's come in and educated not just on themselves and their brand, but on the category. And the category doesn't really get spoken about. So for us, that's one of the things that we want to talk about. In this glass, what you currently have is 100% wheat whiskey. It is a world blend. It is a marriage of whiskies that are produced in Scotland and then married and matured in Japan, and distillates that are distilled in Japan and then matured fully there and then married into this mix. So what you end up with is 100% wheat whiskey. It is continuous column still distillation. It is matured fully in its entirety in either bourbon, American oak bourbon cask, or Oloroso European oak sherry casks. We then marry those whiskies together and we finish everything in rare Japanese Mizunara oak. And every single Shibui that we make is natural color and non-chill filtered. On the nose, you're going to get, because it's wheat, like wheat has got a very kind of aromatic perfume style note to it. It's why we use it really as the backbone of blends in Scotland. It's much more floral. It's much more got notes of like jasmine tea, much more kind of herbally. And then you've got notes of like coconut and maybe elements of cereal sitting on there. So I was reading some of the notes, like it's kind of almost like gin on the nose. What I mean, that's not a bad description of that. What I'd say by that is it's floral. So it doesn't have the same astringency as gin would have, but it's got definitely the same kind of floral backbone and kind of cereal notes that you would get from certain spirit. And then on the palate, this is designed to be easy sipping whiskey. If you had water or add ice to this, it will go cloudy because it's non-chill filtered, even at 43% ABV. And it is much more different in the palate than what you expect. So this is it's designed to coat the palate. It's super sweet. It's super soft. It's the perfect whiskey. If you're an Irish whiskey drinker, you're going to love this. If you're a bourbon drinker, you'll find this super easy. If you're a Scotch whiskey drinker and a blended whiskey drinker, you'll find this really approachable. It is designed to be approachable. It's designed to be like an entry-level Japanese style. The Japanese style is much lighter on the palate than, for example, Scotch whiskies would be. But it's just, real easy. Slides down like a penguin in a wetsuit. Top to the back. It's basically juice for grown-ups. So with that being said, sit back, enjoy that dram.
Yes. So I have a couple questions on this one.
Sure.
You know, transparency is fantastic, and I'm glad that you guys are so open about telling us that, you know, these first few whiskeys are a marriage of
world blends.
of world blends,
Yep.
which, you know, from a Japanese perspective gets misconstrued quite often, and you don't know sometimes what's in a bottle of Japanese whiskey, or maybe Japanese whiskey. But you know, so when you're talking about whiskey from Scotland, is it a 50-50 split, or what? You know, I mean, are you allowed to even go into that? I mean, how do you come up with these, you know, percentages on the blend? And then also a second question is, how long is it finished in the Mizunara casks?
It's a great question. So twofold. First and foremost, like any blended whiskey, nobody's going to give you the rest. You phone up Johnny Walker and ask him what the percentages are of everything, nobody's going to tell you that. What I can say to that effect is that for us, we're not as concerned about where the whiskey was born from. And I'll tell you why when I get to talk about why we do what we do. I'm more concerned about the quality of the liquid and the flavor profile that we're getting from. So where did the distillate came from isn't as important to me. When you hear what I'm going to say and talk about the art of blending and why World Blend is really intrinsically part of all things Japanese, pick your brand. Every single one of them have built their fortunes on World Blending. And I will explain why all of that. Once we're done here, there's a lot of people that are going to go, shit, I never thought about it this way. And that was my reaction when I started to look into what we were doing. I was like, wait a minute, how is this? Why am I now finding this out now? Because I've gone out like a forensic detective to figure out what the hell's in this bottle. Like, why was I don't want to be surprised by what's in the glass. And that was happening to me on the regular. And I thought, this doesn't sit well with me. So that's why we didn't set out to be like, we're going to be a transparency brand. We set out with the goal of, we're going to make excellent whiskey. And it doesn't matter how we make it, it matters that the quality is always excellent. Does that make sense? The byproduct of that is that if you're just focused on the quality of the liquid, you should be able to tell everybody everything about it. What is the mash bill? What is the saccharification? What is the fermentation? What does it all look like before you get to oak? Then what is the maturation time? So for us, we're predominantly maturing for, full life for bourbon cask and Oloroso sherry cask. The finish for Mizunara oak is relatively short. I often compare it to Balvenie 21-year-old Portwood. Mizunara oak, like Portwood, is really powerful. The finish for Balvenie 21 Portwood is between 3 and 6 months, and that's the same for us with Mizunara oak, between 3 and 6 months. We have matured some of the stuff. Some of a 10-year-old will see it for maybe up to 9 months. But the reality of it is there is a time frame for Mizunara where it is fantastic. Mizunara oak does two things very well. It does finishing, and then it does super old long-term maturation really well. Anything between the ages of like finishing, like 1 year, anything I've tried that's been matured exclusively in Mizunara at 3 years up to about 15 or 16, I don't like it. I just don't think it's particularly pleasant. And the reason for that is that that's not really what the oak was designed for. It wasn't designed for maturing liquid. It was a furniture wood. It was designed for building furniture. So it acts differently over a short period of time frame, and it's very, very strong. So think of it this way. You get notes of like incense, and it smells like standing in the inside of an ancient temple. Like if you go and visit an old church or go and visit like some kind of old building, you got that incense and candle wax, and it just smells like, not musty, but just like smells old and kind of like, I don't know if you can quite put your finger on it, like almost spiritual. That kind of is what Japanese Mizunara oak smells like. And it is fantastic, but it's really strong. And if you finish with it and you finish with it properly, then you can get some great flavors. This is light, delicate style, so we're looking at a short finish here. But when you start to look at what we do with a pure malt and a pure malt 10-year-old, it's a little bit longer, and you get a little bit more of that power coming through. If you to take a whiskey out of that in 5 years or 6 years, it doesn't taste right. And the reason for that is all the flavor is just saturated in, and it's just bowled over the spirit. If you let it go for long periods of time, what happens is the wood influence depreciates, and you start to get this balance back of like the floral, lighter, more intricate notes of the spirit cutting back through the wood, and the wood doesn't become as one-dimensional effectively. I often talk about it as like the brass band section of our maturation process. So I'll make a lot of analogies tonight. I'll talk about the whiskey maker like a conductor. I will talk about barrels in the warehouse like musicians. If that is the case, Mizunara Oak is absolutely the brass band section. It's super loud. It's super, it drives everything forward, but it's just, you got to know when to play and when to tone it down a little bit. And for me, that's what Mizunara does really well.
And also, when it comes to choosing wheat as your grain, I've had some Japanese whiskeys that obviously are using corn as their grain.
Yep.
And they're more similar to what we would think a bourbon is.
Yep.
Where did the idea of wheat come from? Was that something from the outset that you guys chose? Yep. And was that the predominant grain that you were seeing from Scotland? And did that make you look for wheat in Japan to blend with, or how did that process work? Because we don't see a lot of wheat whiskeys. We have. Actually, in a couple of weeks, we're doing a journeyman corsets, whips, and that's a 100% wheat whiskey as well. But you don't see a lot of wheat whiskeys like that. And
that's why. That's the answer. Okay. So basically, I love wheated bourbon, like I love Weller and things like that. I think we get some really nice wheat whiskies that we get to choose from here. There's not a single 100% wheat whiskey from Japan. And I was like, let's fix that. So you'll hear when I talk about our story, a lot of what we do is trying to get the Japanese to stop thinking about how they make whiskey, because that's how they've been told this is all you can do. And the world of Japanese whiskey is so unique to absolutely everything else. And let's start at the beginning, right? All whiskey is rooted in agriculture. So in Scotland, we grow wheat and we grow barley. And it was the farmers of the land that were basically using the grain of the land to make moonshine. So they had a tradable commodity. We're talking about like the 15th century and 16th century and that kind of time frame, right? And it was basically moonshine. It's called Cleric in Scotland, which was right off the still, absolute rocket fuel. Is either going to get you really drunk or really dead. Those are your options. And basically, the successful farmers realized there's more money to be made in sling and hooch than there is in farming the land. And they started to build their distilleries and build out their distilleries around the agriculture of the land. Okay, so there's a little bit of a fable that goes on with Scotch whisky distilleries where they say, we chose this land here because of the water source. That's not necessarily completely true. What was happening is the water source was being chosen because they wanted to grow grains and they needed a water source for that. And then they started to have distilleries for illicit distilling. And then they went, oh, wait a minute here, we need both of these things. So it kind of went hand in glove. But the agriculture was shaping the whiskey of the land in Scotland. We then, in Scotland, we trade with, it's called the Old Alliance with France. So we had access to wine barriques. We had access to sherry barrels from Spain. And that's what we were using to transport liquid around once the distillery started to get more popular, or people were like, oh, have you tried this? When it got to its destination, having spent time in barrels, it was golden in color, soft in flavor. The light bulb goes off and we start to understand oak maturation. And then, the world of Scotch whisky takes off as we know it. But at this point, I'm going to say as well, you need to understand that single malt whiskey, all whiskey in Scotland was being used as blend. Like anything that was branded, marketed, and sold was being blended. Single malt didn't exist as a category, like a marketed category, until the 1960s and 1970s. Macallan wasn't released as a single malt until the 1980s. Even though the distilleries have been around since 1824 and the likes, the branding and single malt existed, but it wasn't being sold and traded the way that we see it now as a super high echelon product. Even 1967, when Glenfiddich released the first branded version of it, it wasn't the first ever single malt, not by a stretch of the imagination, but it was the first release of trying to brand single malt like that. It wasn't called single malt, it was called unblended whiskey. Like that's how good the marketing teams in Scotland were at that time. What do we call this stuff we're not blending? Call it unblended. All right, cool. Take an early lunch, Charlie. Like, well done. So there's a disconnect between how we think about whiskey when we walk in and we're like, oh, but look at all of this, and blah, blah, blah. Or what's in the stores. it's really easy to think that that's what it's always been like, and it's not. And then the exact same thing of what I've just described in Scotland happened in the States. The agriculture is by law written into the laws of bourbon production to protect the grain of the land. So law means that 51% of this whiskey needs to be corn to qualify as bourbon. So you have the grains and the agriculture being protected by the laws of the whiskey from that land, right? And then that is true for every other whiskey in the world, except for Japan. So in Japan, you get 2,000 years of rice alcohol production, 600 years of rice distilling, and then in 1918, one guy, Masataka Taketsuru, visits Scotland and goes, right, I'm going to go out here, works at a handful of distilleries, marries a Scottish woman whose father is part of the whiskey industry, comes back to Japan with her, partners up with Shinjiro Torai, they find a place in Japan that looks like Scotland and start to build a distillery. They go back to Scotland, take carbon copy photographs of Glenrothes stills, speak to the guys at Glenrothes, they're still not happy about it. Every single scratch, dent, dink, everything that's still there, replicate them exactly to the T, lift them up and take them to Japan, settle down, and to this day, this is where things get exciting. The grain that is used for all the malt production whiskies in Japan, so Yamazaki, that story I'm talking about, that's the start of building Yamazaki Distillery, and it ends up to become the part of Suntory Group. But that distillery production and everything that they went into, the grain was coming from Scotland. And to this day, the grain that is used for malt whiskey, for Nika, for Suntory, for the majority of whiskies, even our own brands that we are producing, the base ingredient, the grain, is coming from Scotland and England, or other parts of Europe, but predominantly Scotland and England. So people don't think about Japanese whiskey. When people I'm pissing myself laughing half the time when people start to talk to me about this Japanese whiskey and all these new rules and laws. I'm like, Japanese whiskey? How about you use the cereal of your own continent? Like, this is nuts. Like, we're not even, we have drank the marketing Kool-Aid of what qualifies as Japanese whiskey. And for me, that's where I was like, right, let's start calling bullshit a little bit, right? Let's start having fun with what could we actually produce at these distilleries? Where can we start to do world blending? When can we start to do single grain rice whiskies? And if we put it all together, will we have a run of whiskies that has never existed before? Because the Japanese don't want to work well together. And the reason they don't want to work together is because Masataka Taketsuru falls out with Shinjiro Torai, fast forward about 10, 15 years, and he builds Nika. So the two biggest competitors in the space, and this is in the 1930s, right? So early 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s, you have the building of Nika's distilleries. And at that point, these two distilleries that are buying in malted barley to distill at their distilleries in Japan make spirit, but they have nowhere to blend. They have no one to blend with. And all whiskey in Scotland that's marketed, blended, and sold out is blended whiskey. So they didn't just come up with, now we're going to start releasing our single malt, and now it's all single malt whiskey. They were like, where are we going to find whiskey for blending? Because in Japan, that is the art. It's the definition, the defining thing about the Japanese is they have refined the art of blending to perfection. And that's what I wanted to celebrate with Grain Select, with Pure Malt, and with Pure Malt 10-year-old. I just wanted to tell people the real history behind it. So at this time frame, from 1930s to call it late 1970s, you've got 40 years plus of what would you be drinking if single malt hasn't been created yet in Scotland and marketed and branded, and then the Japanese followed suit. But if the whiskey that you've made in Japan and the grains came from Scotland and your stills were built in Scotland and shipped to Japan, and the entire production process that you've used was a replication of what came out of Scotland, well, the easiest thing for blending would be to buy whiskies from Scotland. So for the last 100 years, the blends, the entire backbone of Suntory, the entire backbone of Nika was based and built upon the ability to blend whiskies from other countries, predominantly Scotland, with the malt whiskies that they were producing in Japan. And that is the thing where there's a disconnect. People don't realize that that's still going on. And people don't realize that even if you're drinking single malt whiskey from Japan, that 99.9% of the grain that was used in that distillate came from Scotland, England, or other parts of Europe. And that's where I was like, we're going to have a field day with this. And that's it. Like that was really our story. We're like people need to know this story. People need to know why we are making whiskey to taste the way it does. And if they don't know that story, then they're going to repeat the same story that they've read in, any lazy journalist that's just gone, okay, cool. Mazatake Taketsuru came up with Japanese whiskey, as if he just like imagined it out of thin air. And now we've got Japanese whiskey. What happened in the 1920s was the equivalency of me going back to Scotland today and saying, right, guys, we're doing it all wrong. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to buy in corn from the middle of America. We're going to make a mash bill. Has to be at least 51% corn. We're going to take that, distill it, put it through a column still distillation, and then mature that spirit in brand new, heavily charred American oak barrels in the hottest part of Scotland. And that is now Scotch whiskey. And everybody in Scotland would go, wait, you sure? And everybody in Kentucky would have a heart attack because they would know that all I've done is taken the world of bourbon and transplanted it into Scotland. Now, in the 1920s, Facebook and Twitter didn't exist. So Mazatake Taketsuru pulled off the biggest, like the absolute biggest, I mean, what do we want to call it? I guess it's like the Kaiser Soze, isn't it? Like it's the biggest Kaiser Soze move you've ever seen. Like, this is the story. And everybody went, cool, sounds like that's the story.
Yeah, but
really
Japan, I mean, I mean, maybe we should drink the pure malt and talk about this, but
sure.
Japan is good at taking people's ideas or technologies and making them better, and I've had, whether it's cars or whatever, electronics, whiskey, I've been to Chichibu a couple of times now and visited with them. I mean, the precision and incredible, just attention to detail is unlike any Scotch producer that I've witnessed. Now, I've been to a lot of Scotch distilleries, and I love them too, but there is this genuine kind of maybe, and I don't want to call it I don't know.
We're more slapdash.
I don't want to be, I'm not saying it's a stereotype of who they are, but they do make the quality, the process, and maybe the blending capabilities, they take it to a really high level when they're really doing it well. It's like Ichiro's World Blend, it's incredible.
Correct.
And they say what it is, and it's great, we're big fans. So it's fun to hear your story. I like where it's coming from because it is true, and it is the real deal in terms of where it all started, and blending is really the art of Japan. Now, Holly, is there barley being grown in Japan though? I mean, are there?
Oh, there is.
Okay.
They grow barley in Japan, but it's from the size and scales of the distilleries that are there. The majority of the grain that's used for whiskey production comes from Europe style.
From Scotland, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Scotland and England, mostly England actually, for the distilleries here. But Simpson's the bigger providers. That's the majority where the grain's coming from. So
all right, so let's do pure malt, and then we'll still debate what because we have Taketsuru's pure malt as well, so we can
nice go side by side.
Just
cool.
One question on the first one. What was the ABV on it?
43%.
43. Yep. I think all of these are 40.
The first three whiskies that we're going to have, everything from Nagata. So these whiskies, exactly like Charles just explained. For us, what we're trying to do with our core range whiskies, so Grain Select, Pure Malt, Pure Malt 10-year-old, is celebrate the artists and the art of blending. Like, the thing that made Japanese renowned for their whiskey making isn't the fact that they came up with it, it's the fact that they perfected the art of it. And there is an attention to detail that Charles outlined that is completely correct, which is this ability to refine to the finest of detail and to perfect and to, they're not really known for their innovation. What they're known for is perfecting excellence across everything. And I will start, saying this, like I'm a massive fan of every Japanese whiskey. We're in great company. Like we're spoiled for choice, but we're still in our infancy in the world of Japanese whiskey, right? So if you think about it, there's only 70 brands or so that you can actually buy here in the USA. Of those, which ones are really, doing the right stuff and making the right stuff? Call that maybe 50 of them. And that's relatively small. And even now, you've got, the majority of people that talk about Japanese whiskey stick to the number one and the number two brand, which is Suntory and Nikka. I only drink Yamazaki, I only drink, can you imagine if you walked into a whiskey restaurant and a whiskey bar and somebody said, oh, we only have the best whiskies in the world, Glenfiddich and Glenlivet. I mean, they're fantastic whiskies, but you're talking about, the Pepsi and the Coca-Cola of Japanese whiskey. These are massive, massive production facilities. They are amazing and their whiskies are spectacular, but let's be very clear, these are not small, niche, esoteric brands. Yamazaki Distillery alone is 9.4 million litres of production, give or take. It's 3 times the size of Dalmore. Then they've got 1.2 million barrels of warehouse stock. That's the warehouse capacity of Glenfiddich. These are big houses of whiskey. They make exceptional whiskey, but it's not small batch and it's not rare and it's not, you shouldn't have to remortgage your house and sell your firstborn child to get a bottle of it. And that's part of the problem that we found ourselves in, trying to find age statement, really worthy whiskey is being, a sticking point. So let's get into the pure malt. This is for us, we have moved into 100% malted barley. All we're doing here is changing the grain. We then do a double copper pot still distillation, and then it sees the exact same maturation. So it's seeing, bourbon cask, or also sherry cask, and then we marry everything together. And like the rug in the Big Lebowski, Mizunara oak is the rug that ties the room together. It just pulls it all together, makes it all kind of cohesively Japanese. And it's just, it becomes much more roasted and toasted. So darker sugars, more caramel notes. You're going to get notes of coffee, toffee, toasted walnuts. Roasted and toasted is usually what I call it. Roasted coffee, toasted walnuts. Oh, Larry Brown, right in the money there, Larry. Well done.
Yeah.
Again, what I'd say here as well, just to some of the things we're proud of with the brand. We are the most awarded Japanese whiskey to ever launch in the United States. We only came into the market, I want to say 16 months now. 16 months we've been in the market. Within our first 4 months, we picked up 90-point scores or higher for every single one of our 9 whiskies that we initially launched. Our 10-year-old bourbon cask and our white oak are 94 and 95-point scores respectively from IWSC and Ultimate Spirits Challenge. And those are important. IWSC I like because, the master blending judging panel on that includes Richard Patterson making Dalmore for 51 years, David Stewart, who made Balvenie for 53 years, and Brian Kinsman, the whiskey maker at Glenfiddich. Those are the guys that are judging these whiskies and saying, yeah, this is 94 or this is 95 points. That matters to me. So it's good to be recognised by our peers. It's such a high level.
Are you in other parts of the world as well, or where are you launching?
Everything right now is in the United States. So the number one thing that we focused on was, like I was talking about earlier, that difficulty of being able to buy age statement Japanese whiskey. We're going to fix that. So I've laid down a 10-year stock supply across our age statements and our 10-year-old pure malt in particular. I will grow it into a 40-year stock supply the way I did for Macallan. These other companies can keep going selling whiskies everywhere else they want, no problem at all. I think the market's here in the USA. I would rather build our brand here, educate our consumer here, and continue to not annoy the living shit out of people that want to drink Japanese whiskey by telling them there's one bottle for 700 people. Like, what are we doing here? That's a surefire way to annoy your customers. Do you know what I mean? So for us, we're trying to make sure that we avoid some of those pitfalls.
Where in Japan, are you? I mean, so you're not saying the distillery, but
no, about actually, I'm going to tell you everything. So I'm going to tell you all 4 distilleries. So
okay.
The first distillery that you're having from our core range whiskey, so Grain Select, Pure Malt 10, they're all made at our Nagata distillery. So this is on the mainland, Honshu. Basically, if you think about Japan as a run of islands, you've got, the main island is Honshu, and we are on the west coast of that in Nagata, and that's where our master blending team are for this.
Okay.
They're probably one of the best blending teams I've ever worked with. When we start to look at our single grains, we name every single distillery as well. So we have 4 different distillery partnerships. We've invested in, we're not just going out there and sourcing out liquid. We've invested into those distilleries. We have long-term contracts in place. We have our own, warehousing and things going on. We've effectively gone in there and said, we love the existing liquids that you've got. Here's the style of whiskey I'm going to make in this house. And I've bought those barrels and created those whiskies with them. And then that's what we've laid down. And they're really excited about some of the stuff that we're doing, because that's not what they were used to doing. They weren't used to some of the fun stuff that we've got them to play around with, which is part of the joy of whiskey making. And that's what I mean. Like, I kind of feel like the Japanese have robbed themselves of what it should have been like. Holly, you've got your hand up.
I've never raised my hand in Zoom, so I wanted to try it.
Oh, cool.
No, I have a question.
I thought you were just thinking about a high five there. I was like, yeah.
No, high five. And no, I've been really enjoying the conversation. I had a quick question about some of these distilleries. Is it similar to, we've talked a lot about Yamazaki and Hakushu and the Nika distilleries. Is it like Mars and some of these other ones where they're just doing it to maybe make some money, but they're making lots of different liqueurs, and they're really actually, like, how does Japan actually feel about all of this? Like, some of the original producers, like, is it more of, oh yeah, if we, we can make some money? Like, is there actual passion about it, or is it just a little portion of their business?
So that's a great question. And I can't speak for all of them, but I will speak for our distilleries. Our distilleries are fired up and ready to go and into the world of whiskey. But the opportunity to make what they're now saying is this is what qualifies as whiskey, was malt whiskey. So they were talking about malted barley, and this was the definition of whiskey to them. And that those lines became muddier and muddier and muddier. And the reason that we've started to see some of these new laws and regulations coming out, and even just like the guidelines for them, is because basically what was happening was, anybody with a distillery that was making any alcohol, so predominantly things like, sochu and sake and things like that, they were fortifying their alcohol, fortifying their base spirit, throwing in grain alcohol, lifting the ABV up and adding caramel coloring, and then be like, and that's now Japanese whiskey. And there was nothing to stop that from happening. And I think that because that became like the market over I want to say even in like the 1990s and the 2000s and 2010, in that last kind of 20 years, that's kind of what's happened. So you've got some really great distilleries. You've got the guys at Mars, which I absolutely adore their whiskies. I think everything that they make is great as well. You've got some great blends coming out just from different producers. Some of it is great. Some of it is, I wouldn't put my name to it, but there's a category there for everybody, right? And then you've got some of the ones that people go, right, that's the real, like, that's the one that you put on the pedestal, like the Suntory Group and Nika and things like that. And that's just the way, I think from our standpoint, that's where we want to compete, right? I will never be the size and scale of them. I will be the Balvenie to their Glenfiddich and Glenlivet. I will be the one that people go, if you know about Japanese whiskey, you watch what the guys at Shibui put out, because every time they do a release, it's really cool, it's really interesting, and they know their shit. I'd rather be that brand than, hey, it's got a fancy Japanese label on it. Roll a dice, good luck. So I think that when you think about the way that the Japanese look at it, it's been kind of monopolized by the biggest brands who've had the ability to buy in on malted barley whiskey production rather than other distilleries. And there's plenty of distilleries out there that do other things. So the ones that are now starting to get into whiskey, what they're really doing is getting into malt whiskey production and wheat whiskey production. What I want them to start doing more of is single grain rice whiskey production, because that shit is undeniably exclusively Japanese. Like, I've never tasted whiskey like it. And that to me was the most exciting thing about, like, I love our pure malt. I think it's fantastic. It's, our pure malt 10-year-old, which please put up the pure malt 10-year-old. We'll talk about that. This is just the big brother version of what you've just had. This is one of our most decorated whiskies, 91, 92 point scores, gold medal at San Francisco, all that other fun jazz. It is the muscle car version of what you've just drank with our pure malt. But here's what I can definitely say. When I tried those whiskies, when I put our style of pure malt and pure malt 10-year-old together, I love them. Like, I think they're really great, and I hope you guys enjoy them as well. But I can't say that I've never tried whiskey like it, because I have in Scotland, way before I even tried any Japanese whiskey. In the same way, when somebody handed me my first glass of Yamazaki, I was like, this is delicious. But I wouldn't have closed my eyes and gone, this is absolutely definitely from Japan. Same way when I worked with Nika, I was like all of these things. And I was like, when I started to learn more things about where the whiskies were coming from, the blends, like Nika from the barrel, cool, that's a world blend. Why have we not been talking about this? Because it's actually really difficult. It's really difficult to take whiskies from around the world and create a consistent product. And that is the art. And that is the thing that, you know, the skill set that is there. If you speak to people in Japan, they don't talk about Yamazaki. They talk about Hibiki is the number one, you know, that's the moment for them, because it is that art of blending. And I think that's kind of the thing where I think the Japanese have maybe just short sold themselves a little bit on what Japanese whiskies really could and should have become. And that's why we do both. It's why we have our core range whiskies of, you know, wheat and malt. And it's why we also wanted to celebrate three different distilleries in Okinawa for single grain, because I don't think people have tried stuff like this. Even other rice whiskies, I don't think they taste the same.
Yeah, so people that don't know, you know, Hibiki that he just mentioned is a combination of the two distilleries under the Suntory world. So you have Yamazaki and Hakushu, you know, blended. So Hibiki is that beautiful blend, and you see Japanese harmony, and you see some other Hibiki names. You know, that is the art of blending. I mean, that is what Japan is truly known for. So I really enjoy this pure malt. I think the pure malt is fantastic. I remember when Alex tasted us on this, you know, I was like, wow, okay, now we're talking. This is, you know, pretty special whiskey, even for a world, you know, you got, I'm this purist, so it's a little, I still struggle sometimes with the world, mostly because of the Japanese brands that don't that aren't transparent with it, you know, that are saying it's Japanese when it's not. So it's still, I struggle with it a little bit, but that's just me. You know, but this is a beautiful whiskey. Now let's drink the 10-year-old now, but at the same time, can you tell us, Nicholas, like, okay, you've got this background in Scotch and you're a keeper and you've got this wonderful history. Why did you pick Japan? Like, why didn't you make a blended Scotch? Or why didn't you go down the road of, you know, creating an independent bottling brand or your own brand using, you know, your expertise in Scotland? You know, how did you get connected with Niigata? How did you get connected to these Okinawa distilleries? You know, what is it that, you know, how did Shibui come around? You know, is it because, you know, Japan is starting to become more recognized as a whiskey place and you felt that was the best opportunity, you know, and not to be lost within all of these other Scotch brands that are starting now? And, you know, I'm just curious, you know, how that vision, where that all came from. And, you know, it seems like it's a hard thing to do, you know, to connect to the Japanese and have them trust you that they're going to be represented correctly here in the US as well. You know,
Correct. Everything that we do, we don't just have transparency with our customers and consumers. We have transparency with we have complete trust from both, like, the distilleries with us and us with the distilleries. We allow them to sign off on everything that we do. And you know, we're not just buying any old stuff because they said that's what they've got available. We are absolutely critical of every drop of liquid that goes into any bottle that carries the Shibui name, as we should be, because if you want to compete at the highest level, you need to be that strict with yourself. It came about, like I said, I am one of the owners, but I'm one of 3 owners. So it's myself and 2 sisters, Lauren and Rachel Simmons. And Lauren and I worked together. Like I said, we launched Nika Japanese whiskey into the US. Lauren and I, we'd been invited out to Japan many times in the past, and we were out doing some stuff. And we'd spoken about this when we were working with Nika, which was, and I'm not, if I tell you a story, it's not because I'm trying to badmouth one of the other brands. I'm trying to give you the things in my head that are like, this is like an absolute red flag in the field. Why can't we see this? So when we were out with Nika, we were like, oh, you know, this is for, they were saying, oh, this is for the coffee still is. And they're like, oh, fantastic, cool, we'd love to have a look. And I'm like, no. I'm like, why can't we go away? You've got whiskey. You got 2 whiskeys named after this. Like, I want to take a look at the coffee still that was built in Glasgow and all these other kind of cool things. And they're like, no, we're not allowed to do that right now, which is mental, right? That's like, to me, having worked and lived in distilleries all my life, I was like, this is nuts, right? Fine, okay, no problem at all. And really what we figured out later on and afterwards was the reason we weren't allowed to go in is because there was barrels of Scotch whiskies in that part of the warehousing and in that part of the distillery. And we're like, at this point, nobody knew Nika from the barrel was a world blend, right? So folk were like, oh, Nika from the barrel. Nobody knew because they hadn't told anybody. So to me, it's not that, it doesn't bother me that that's a process. It bothers me that I wasn't told. Not that it makes a drop of difference to the quality of the liquid. The liquid is outstanding. Nika from the barrel is a fantastic blend, but don't bullshit me what something is to get me to part with my cash and then pretend that it's something else.
I didn't realize that it was a world whiskey until tonight.
Yeah.
Is that something that they've said? Like, is that, it is? Okay.
They had to.
Yeah.
So when these new, like, here's the other thing. See these laws, they're not laws and they won't become laws. I think it's really interesting. First and foremost, just to put it out there, we don't need to change a damn thing about what we do because we've never said anything other than this is what you're drinking, this is what it is. And that's the difference, right? So if you look on Nika's website, they'll say this whiskey doesn't conform to the new guidelines of Japanese whiskey. And I'm like, okay, cool, right. But it still doesn't tell you why. And that's the rub, right? So like they'll tell you whether it applies or whether it doesn't, but it won't tell you why. And one of the things that stood out with me was people are like, especially here in the USA, we're really well read. We're really well educated in the world of whiskey. We know what's good, we know what's not. And we will spend our time figuring stuff out. But I wasn't joking when I said I had to become like a forensic detective. There are Japanese whiskey blends out there. I can't even tell you the grain mix up. Like if anybody can tell me what's in Tokai, please enlighten me. Like what's in it? I don't know. Like I've heard roughly, but you can't find it anywhere. You won't get a spokesperson telling you anything. And I'm like, why am I guessing? What's it? Like it shouldn't be like that. Like I just fundamentally, I think that's wrong. And I think that's the thing that for us, we're like, there's an easier way to do this. Just tell everybody everything. And if you make a world blend, tell people why you're blending it the way you're blending it. Like there's, to me, when people talk about Japanese whiskey, I don't. Let me give you an example that I gave somebody in Suntory and their jaw hit the floor because nobody from Suntory has gone on a whiskey tasting panel with me and for good reason. So basically we were getting into this conversation and I was kind of giggling to myself and it's like, this is a mental conversation, a mental chat. And I said, look, in Scotland, in Edinburgh, there's an amazing sushi restaurant. Like it's outstanding. The chef's from Glasgow, moved to Edinburgh. He spent time living in Japan and was just bowled over by his experience there. Came back to Edinburgh and opened this superb sushi restaurant. Took all his chefs out to Japan and had them classically trained, had custom knives all made for them. They still go out to the auction houses and they buy, $1 million tuna and all these amazing things. It's phenomenal. And then it's all shipped in on ice and prepared. And it's absolutely some of the best sushi you will ever have in your life. And as great as it is, it doesn't make it Scotland's national dish. Right? We've got haggis for that. Get it right round you, Japan. You've got your tuna, we've got haggis. But the point, like, there was no comeback to that, and that's the thing, right? If you take the ingredients out of a different continent and just produce it somewhere, that's now the defining thing that makes it Japanese. That's not what makes it Japanese. What makes it Japanese is the attention to detail from the blenders. the attention to detail from the cask procurement stuff, the attention to detail on using multiple yeast strains, that makes it Japanese. So when I start to talk about single grain whiskies and things like that, and like rice whiskey is a great one. People are always made with rice, as if, what did you think they were going to make whiskey? Every whiskey in the world has had a stepping stone process to its. And if you like, nobody in Scotland was like that. Let's just take some barley, we'll distill a spirit, and let's lay it down for 18 years. That was a stepping stone goal, right? And that's the thing that is completely vacant when we start, especially when we talk about rice whiskey. People are like, oh, that's just barrel aged whatever. But that's the funny thing about it. It's just barrel aged soju. I'm like, first of all, it's totally not. That's a completely different style of making alcohol. But you can do that with anything. That's like me saying Scotch whiskey, that's just barrel aged distilled beer. Now, technically, what I've said is absolutely correct, but it sounds like I'm being disparaging around single malt Scotch whiskey. And that's kind of what's happened in the world of Japan. And it's happened because the companies that control malt whiskey production know how much money they're making. And they want to continue to make sure that anything that carries the term Japanese whiskey, even closely associated with it, is controlled by the few people that have malt whiskey licenses, and not actually what makes it the whiskey of the land. And that's the defining thing for us at Shibui. I don't care whether or not it's made with malted barley or with wheat or with rice. I care if it's great whiskey, and I care about the blending team behind it. Outside of that, the rest is marketing and noise.
Okay. I hear you. All right. So
let's do this.
Let's go to rice.
Let's go to rice.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go bourbon.
So before we go to rice, so Holly was just at Vinexpo down in New York City a couple weeks ago. She was on a panel down there talking about our revolution in the retail world, but she attended or went to the Japanese area of Vinexpo and looked into what was going on in the spirits world, and I guess the sake wine world as well. But I wanted, before you speak, Nicholas, about these next 4 whiskeys, I wanted, if Polly is willing to, I don't know, what was it that you kind of experienced when you talked about or brought up rice whiskey at the Vinexpo, and why did that happen? Like I've heard it kind of secondhand from you talking to other people about it, but I want you to kind of explain to the group what it is that you're seeing, and maybe then Nicholas can kind of come with his perspective and how that maybe is not the case or is the case. I don't know. So could you do that? Was that possible?
It is. I am not a sake or shochu expert. I learned that very quickly while I was at these seminars that I went to, but there was a Japanese spirits and alcohol seminar, and I'll look it up and type it in the chat, but it was the Japanese Trade Expo. Maybe you were there, Nicholas. But they had lots of different, they spoke about Japanese wine, which I didn't know that there was Japanese wine. They spoke about, obviously, shochu and sake were the most prevalent of the topics, and all the different polishing levels and everything you could want to know. And I went up to the woman who's leading this trade organization and importing a lot of these very special sakes and shochus. And they had some single malts that were there, some world blends and some apparently Japanese, but we're not sure from where. And I asked her, I found her, and I was so excited about rice whiskey, because anyone who's in the Saratoga Whiskey Club knows that Oishi and Fukano were like some of the first things that I wanted to bring into the shop, because that sort of floral tropical note is something that I search for in refill hogsheads in the Highlands of Scotland, and you can find it right away when you get into rice whiskey. And so it's not for everyone, that's for sure, but I think it's such a beautiful style. So I asked her about it, and she was pretty dismissive. She was like, well, with the new rules, she was like, thank goodness that won't grow. And I was a little bit perturbed by that because I was like, well, I was hoping it would grow for my whiskey shop. Like I was actually coming to you to see if there were other brands we could have exclusively for the shop. And she was very adamant that it's really just, it's not the historical drink. It's not the way that it should be produced. It's sake, it's shochu. That is not what it is. They're just playing into the US market, and was a little bit dismissive. And I just kind of walked away like, that's too bad. I wanted to buy some from you if there was more. So that's where I was left with that, that she thinks the category is going to go away now with some of the new rules.
It's not. But the reaction that you got is exactly what happens when somebody says, hey, you're an import, I'm paying you money to do this, and this is the story that you're going to tell. Like, you can lift up almost every magazine, just Google Japanese whiskey, and it starts the way I told the story. Mazatake Taketsuru goes to Scotland, as if nobody ever in Japan had ever thought of anything prior to this. Now, here's the funniest thing. She said, this is all new and blah, 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 blah. That's not the traditional way. The oldest spirit in Japan, the oldest distilled spirit in Japan, something called awamori, which is closer to what we're doing with our single grain rice whiskies. It's 600 years of distilling history from Okinawa. And they had awamori caves where they would basically take this rice distillate. Again, it was using Koji, it was using yeast. They would create the moromi in the mash, and then they would distill it into an alcohol, and then they would just put it into clay pots. And they would put those clay pots into awamori caves and let them mature there, anywhere from 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 300 years. Like there was 300-year awamori. World War II destroyed most of the awamori caves on Okinawa. So the oldest spirit in Japan has got more ties to rice distillate alcohol than the grain that they're proclaiming, which is an imported grain. And the majority of grain that is used by these big distilleries is majority imported. Like it's such a backwards conversation that I'm almost excited about it. Like I'm giddy. You see me getting animated when I start to talk about it. And it's not because I'm frustrated. I'm excited about it. And when people say things like that, like, we're not going to do that, blah, 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 I'm hoping it's going to go away. She has absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the spirit world. And it's the same.
She had many concerns, but I think her biggest issue with it all was the oak maturation. Because you mentioned the clay pots. I think she kept saying that is not normal. That is not normal. They try and, they'll sometimes strip color out of it. Like that is not normal. She was very adamant about some of the pieces of the puzzle of our rice whiskey.
I think one of the things that I find really funny is most of these people haven't ever made whiskey. So for me, and I'm not trying to say this, but to pick a fight, but I'm the perfect person to take this fight on. So the reason I think I'm the perfect person to take this fight on is it's really difficult to look me in the eye as a Scotsman and tell me that malt whiskey starts in Japan. And I'm like, good luck. Like, good luck. And I don't care this bullshit story. Oh, well, some guy came to Scotland. Some guy came to Scotland and completely and utterly ripped off Scotch whiskey. Let me tell the story like that. If I spoke like that, people are like, don't be so dismissive about the godfather of Japanese whiskey. I'm like, cool. Never had an original thought in his head. Didn't even want to figure out how to make his own whiskey. Just stole another country's whiskey and then said, this is now Japanese. How dismissive would that sound about somebody that most people put on a pedestal? Now, the reality of it is that's not how I feel. What I feel is like everything in its alcohol production is a stepping stone. And we have amazing malt whiskey produced and distilled and matured exclusively in Japan. We also have world blends, which is what every single one of these companies built their entire brand on. Single malt wasn't coming out of Japan until the 1980s and 1990s. There's 50, 60, 70 years of world blending going on. That is what made the Japanese really great at what they did. So for me, when I look at single grain, this is the grain of the land, grain of Asia, distilled and matured exclusively in Okinawa. What is how could you possibly not call that? That's like saying all whiskey in the United States need to be 100% corn. Well, what if we use rye? Well, where's your rye come from? Canada? Cool. There's we're not touching it. Like, it's a mental mindset to take when talking about something that could be so cool. And the only reason to do that is if you have skin in the game, where you've monopolized the industry and said, well, this is the only thing. Like, that's it. And that, to talk about it and say, well, now they're using oak, that's the defining thing of whiskey. That is the thing that makes something from not whiskey to whiskey. Putting it in oak, it's the necessary component. It's the balance of nature, spirit, wood, and then a banging mastering blender. If you've got those things, you're going to make great spirit. So on that note, I am more than happy to continue to have that conversation.
She was a lovely lady. I'm making her sound like a real evil being. She was
like the Cruella de Vil of the whiskey world.
I actually was fangirling her a bit because I sent it to Doug. Doug's who's at the shop is a huge sake fan, and so I sent her deck over, and I guess I just left a little bummed. I remember texting Charles like, she said rice whiskey is dead. Oh my God, we wanted more of it.
Spent a lot on it.
And that's the thing, like, yeah, that's the thing. I'm like, I don't even think we've warmed up. Like, the way that I look at this is that I think it's really funny. 100 years ago, almost exactly 100 years ago, it was a Japanese guy that came to Scotland and then reshaped the world of Japanese whiskey. I would love it if 100 years to the day almost, it's a Scottish guy going to Japan to reshape Japanese whiskey. And the reason I am so adamant about it is that this stuff.
Wait, but you're Italian.
Hey, this guy. Italian from New Jersey called Nicky Polacchi. Come on. But the funny thing about it is that I'm like, where has this been all my life? When I tried our single grains, this comes from Shinzato Distillery. It's the oldest distillery in Okinawa. It's a single stainless steel pot still distillation. We use premium indica long grain rice, which is different from other rice whiskies. So, Fukano, Hishi, absolutely, I love those brands. They do a lot of single barrel stuff, which we don't do. I'm more interested in consistency of the blend, and I'm more interested in using and playing around with slightly different rice grain. Japonica rice, which is what predominantly has been used in that production process, is super, super high grade sushi rice. Like, it's like really fantastic. But it produces a light style, floral, more floral and delicate. I'm looking for floral and aromatic and a little bit more robust. So we use premium indica long grain rice. It's like an aromatic style rice. We use indigenous Okinawan black Koji in the saccharification process. So to explain that, you need enzymes to convert starches to sugar so that you can create alcohol when you add yeast. When you malt barley or you malt wheat, the grain naturally does that. You basically trick the grain into thinking that it's springtime by steeping it in and out of water. The grain thinks it's been raining, starts to sprout, but that sprouting process effectively, it's been generating inside itself the enzymes that can help convert starches to sugar. Rice does not do that. So you do that by adding Koji into the process. Koji is used for soy sauce production. It's like thousands of years old Japanese technique. Again, it's inherently Japanese. It's tied into, it's a type of fungus strain, and it's folded into the mash. Sounds a little bit odd, but actually what it does by putting a fungus into the mix, it creates a barrier to bacteria. So it basically shoots up hyphae and then puts like spores and then hyphae out over the top. And it acts like an umbrella over the mash. And it produces, for us, by using indigenous black Koji, it pushes a huge amount of citric acid into the mash. So before we've even then put in the yeast, we're starting to pack in flavor. We're not trying to make a delicate beer. We're trying to get as much boldness into the concentrate of the mash as possible. We then add yeast, it starts to ferment, and then we distill. And when you distill, for us at Shinzato, we have, on the new packaging coming into market, this might be back to front, so my apologies, but we have what's called here Beyond the Bottle. And it's basically a play-by-play of what we do. So it tells you, here's the distillery, Shinzato Distillery, established in 1846, which is amazing because apparently Japanese whiskey was created in 1920 something. Right? See where I'm going with this? It's just a bit of a like, toodaloo. To end, it says this is when Japanese whiskey began. We tell you the grain, we tell you the distillation type, the cask maturation type. So this is 100% American oak. If you go to our website, we do even put in the saccharification on there as well, but it was a bit wordy from the back of a bottle. We put a few tasting notes. Then we have this little icon, which is we believe in barrels over BS because we believe in barrels over bullshit. We're 100% natural color, and that comes from using great quality oak. So we have a 10-year-old bourbon cask rice whiskey from Shinzato. It's 7th generation whiskey making team, family owned, and it's just tropical fruit, real pretty whiskey, just so different. You know, it's just such a creme brulee, cracked black pepper, little hints of like spiced oak on the palate. Just really, it's sweeter than maybe some wheat whiskies or malt whiskies.
So good.
Is the process to make the whiskey that you're making the same process other than you're changing the rice out? Or is it similar to how sake's made and then you're putting it in an oak barrel?
No, it's similar to, so the process is you're making a mash, and during that process of making a mash, so you take rice or what you through, you steam rice out, you fold the koji into it, and it sits for a couple of days. You then add yeast, and then you add more water, and then you add more rice, and you keep kind of packing it in, and then you take that mash and you strain it down and you distill the water from that. So it takes a little bit longer. So you're talking about a 7 to 9 day mashing process. But the process is, to me, it's called a maroni, but it's closer to making malt whiskey than I can't think of. There's not that much of a difference, to be perfectly candid. So it's all called something different. But outside of that, the process is pretty simple. It's ancient. I often tell people making whiskey is really easy. Making great whiskey is really easy, just much more expensive. So, you know, how much money are you prepared to spend on the barrels is going to affect the quality of your liquid and the output that you get. There's no magic. See these people that are like, I'm going to take my barrel, I'm going to wrap it in cellophane, I'm going to put it under the water, and we're going to speed up the process. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not. Like, you're not, and you're not going to do it to have a better effect than just letting nature take its course. That is the joy of whiskey, right? Every whiskey that you've ever had, ever, in your entire life, it's always been different. The DNA has always been different, because once those barrels have been used, they cannot be exactly replicated exactly. That is the art form of the whiskey maker, to make you think that it is exactly the same. And that's the skill set. Every single DNA of every single, you lift a bottle of Macallan 18-year-old now and lift a bottle of Macallan 18-year-old from 2 years ago, it is a different whiskey. You might not be able to tell the difference, but DNA would. And that's the best. Isn't that so cool to think about it that way? That every time you drink the same whiskey, it's actually something different.
Is that, Nicholas? I'm hijacking the tasting.
No, go for it, Holly, please. I'd rather this was
You're not hijacking. What are you talking about?
a little bit. We have Takamine, which is another. I mean, I guess we're told it's a malt whiskey using Koji. Is their story? I haven't looked into it, but is their story true about how Koji is more effective than just yeast itself, and that he tried to bring it to the United States and the bourbon world said no way? Is that a true story?
Wasn't it said no way? He built a distillery to do it in Chicago, and the mob burned it down in its first year because it was so efficient at producing high quality alcohol that the guys that controlled floor malting and maltsters were like, holy shit, there goes that racket, burn them down. And Takamine was amazing. Like, look the guy up, he's amazing. He's one of the best scientists the world has ever known. He gave all the cherry blossom trees that you see in Washington, DC, he gifted them with the Japanese premier to the United States. He spent out his life in Chicago and then in New York. He created 101 different vaccines and different, like, figured out breaking down all the different enzymes. But yes, he effectively figured out how to use Koji to saccharify barley. And if I could do that shit in Scotland, I would do it tomorrow. I mark my words. We have other things that I'm working on in Japan, and I'll give you a great example. Japanese whiskey distillers, like I said, do not work together in tandem. I have a whiskey coming out later, hopefully this year, if not early next year, where we have 4 distilleries. And I said to two of our distilleries in Okinawa, I was like, here's what I want to do. I want to use wheat, I want to use rice, and I want to use malted barley, and I want to make a blend. And they're like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And I was like, cool. And I want you 2 distilleries to do it. And both of them went, Japanese distilleries we don't work like that. Like we can do it ourselves, or, they can make it for you. I was like, no, that's the point. Like, you guys don't work together. Can I get you to work together? And they were like, okay, nobody's asked us to do this. And I was like, exactly. Like, wouldn't that be cool? Like, let's try it. It might be shit. I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be fantastic, but I'd like to try it. Like, I'd like to at least go, let's give it a shot. Let's see what 2 different distilleries that are not owned by the same parent company. What would happen if we got 2 amazing skill sets together? Don't you think we could create something better than the sum of its parts for just this project? That would be fun. And if it's a disaster, then it's on me. I'm still paying for it. Let's have some fun. And I think that's the thing that's really been missing in the world of Japanese whiskey. The innovation has been stymied because they've been told, this is how we do it. We only look after ourselves. We only make malt whiskey here. We don't speak to other people. We don't let people come and see our stills. Blows my mind. Like, whatever it happens to be, whatever the reason is that you don't get to see something, I'm like, this is exhausting, being this like cagey about how you make whiskey. Like, we're not curing cancer. We're making whiskey. Let's have some fun. Let's drink some great stuff. Let's see if we can get some distilleries to play around with something and go from there. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, Doug has a question, who's here with us.
Has rice, barley, or wheat ever been mixed together in the same blend before? Like, specifically the rice?
Charles, what's Ichiro? What's that? I think they're doing some stuff there, aren't they? Is it wheat and barley, or is it all 3?
I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not 100% sure. I think it might just be wheat and barley in that mix, which is cool. And it's delicious, by the way, for those of you who have not tried it. It's really, really good. For us, here's what I'd say. Rice whiskey is a really funny conversation. In fact, Holly, I wish I'd have told you this beforehand. You could have nailed that woman that was giving you lip. Suntory released a rice whiskey in 2020 called the Essence of Suntory. It was a 15-year-old rice whiskey that they sold in a 375ml bottle for $500. If Suntory are doing it, it's good enough for me.
Essence of Suntory bottles are incredible.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But
incredible.
A few of those, yeah.
But have there been any blends between like the traditional style and the rice whiskeys, like actual blends?
No, I don't know of any that I've had. And that doesn't mean that if not, but if Shibui the first to do it, I'd be shocked and maybe horrified. I'd be delighted, but a little bit shocked that, like, surely to Christ, I'm not the first guy to do this, right? But maybe we will be. Like, maybe that's the fun. I don't think we will be. I'm sure there's somebody else out there, but maybe it wasn't successful. Maybe they didn't do it right. There's 101 reasons why somebody can make a whiskey and it doesn't work. Either they don't have the whiskey chops, or maybe it really wasn't very good, but the idea was fantastic. So we'll see.
Well, that bourbon cask is fantastic.
I'm glad you like it, sir.
Big fan.
Shall we move on to the white oak?
Yeah, white oak, virgin white oak.
This is like baller. This is 95-point score at IWSC, 95-point score at Ultimate Spirits Challenge, finals for the Chairman's Trophy. And it is one of my favorite whiskies that I have ever had in my entire life. And I do not say that just because I own the business. I say that because when I first tasted this is the whiskey that made me go, why have I never seen this kind of whiskey from Japan? What are we missing here? Because this was the wow factor. I was like, this is insane. Like, the aromas, the tropical fruit, the creaminess. There's like hints of macadamia in that and walnut. It's got earthiness and umami notes. It's just mental. And I remember going, I'd rather have something that is really fun and exciting and different than drink something and be like, cool, can you guess which country it's from?
So that's a long time to be in a virgin white oak barrel.
Yep.
Is that because the rice doesn't the rice whiskey doesn't actually, take on as much oak flavor? Or, I mean, how does that work? I mean, I've had, some very young virgin white oak releases that are much higher proof also, so maybe that's what it is too, is maybe it's the proof.
Let it go. Let it go longer. And then, so here's my honest opinion, Charles. I know I'm going to upset people on this call here. I don't like single barrels and I don't like cask strength. And there's two reasons why. And I know I've upset some of you, so my apologies. I don't like cask strength because it's just usually too hot for me. And it's personal preference, but also
I saw a finger come up. I've never seen that before. Sorry.
John.
And you know what? We don't even have the real true cask strength nuts on the call tonight, which is kind of, the ones that are always complaining in my ear. So to see a finger come up, I was like, whoa, what the heck?
I'll tell you why. There is methods to my madness. First and foremost, alcohol is an anesthetic. The higher the alcohol, after 2 of them, there's nothing you can taste. And everybody who I always speak to says, I could drink cask strength whiskey all night long. I can chemically prove that you can't. Like, it doesn't matter what you think you can do. I can chemically prove that your palate can't do that. So there's a balance of science and like where flavors come from and how alcohol interacts with all of that. Now, I'm not saying that 1 or 2 of them can't be amazing. Like, they are, like they can be fantastic. But most whiskey makers drink whiskey with about 50% water into, even at 40% ABV, they'll dilute it down, because what we're looking for is impurity in the alcohol. And when you have super high strength alcohol, it's really difficult to tell how good the quality of the alcohol is, because the alcohol masks a lot of impurity. If you're to take cask strengths and dilute them down to like 30% ABV, you start to see what's really in the glass. And more often than not, I'm always more like, I'd rather drink it at the strength that the whiskey maker thought was really interesting, rather than just came out of a barrel and nobody touched it. And that's again, personal preference. One's not right, one's not wrong. But I can tell you right now, if all you do is drink cask strength whiskey, after 2 or 3 of them, your palate's shot.
Well, I have to say, in a tasting like tonight, when you're just staying in that range of 43 to 40%, it totally works. I mean, there's no question about it. I tend to like, I'm not going to say cask strength, but I do like typically 50% or, in that range. I don't need 65% to be happy. Yeah. But when I also really, really, really appreciate low 40s a lot, especially when you're doing something like we're doing tonight, where you can go from one to the next without it ruining your palate, without it being a 60% in the middle of 40%, or and I challenge those cask strength drinkers all the time to start to like take it back a notch and try and think about these 40%, 45-6% whiskeys with a new thought process, because I did some incredible tastings with Charles McLean, and I know for a fact that he pours a ton of water into his cask strength whiskeys in order to taste it and find what works for him. And, that's really what it's about. So yes, there's a place for cask strength, but it's not the only place.
Correct. I think what you've just said, and Charlie's fantastic. He's one of the best in the business, and he's a good friend. John, feel free if you want to chime in. I'd love to hear your opinion on it, but you just want to flip me off and be done with it. Good.
I wasn't calling him out at all.
No. I'm only teasing. So I prefaced this by saying that I knew I was going to split the room, but I just didn't realize I was going to split your hand. I think that for me, when it comes to cask strength is part of it, and single barrels are the other part of it. And I'll tell you why. Single barrels should be rare. And they should be rare because what you're doing is you're basically taking something away from what could be an integral part of consistency. And with us at Shibui, I was adamant. Our core range whiskies, we need to look at building a sustainable brand. I don't want to be a flash in the pan. We want to come into the market. If we're going to buy up 10 years worth of whiskey, we better make sure that we know what we're doing with it. And let's make sure that we've created a genuine business that feels like we're here to support the market, here to build a repertoire and a rapport with our consumer and say, look, we're a brand that you can trust, because when we go say we're going to do something, we follow through on it. And I think that from our standpoint, when you look at single barrel bottlings, especially in Japan, especially in Okinawa, where these are much smaller distilleries for single grain stuff. If I take a wow factor barrel out of the mix, it could have a real detrimental effect onto consistency of some of the other stuff that I want to do all the time. And for me, that's the rub, right? So, and the second part of it is I've seen brands where all they do is single barrel stuff. That tells me that the master blender doesn't really know what they're doing. And for me, the thing that I will always come back to in Japan is I will never, ever rob these guys of their amazing abilities. And our master blenders across the board are out of this world. And it's what makes what we do so unique. I'm not the whiskey maker. I'm not walking around pretending to be the whiskey maker. There are guys that have been, we're talking 7 generations of doing nothing but doing this. And all I'm doing in the process is saying, I'd like you to think about it this way. I'd like us to look at creating some different things that maybe you haven't thought about right now. Can we maybe do that? Like, I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm telling you what I think I'd like our brand to look and feel like. And I think you're the guy that can do it for me, or this team are the team that can do it for me. And they buy in on that, because I'm not going a million miles away from what their heart and soul is, but I'm definitely getting them a little bit out of their comfort zone. And then it comes to me, we went through 1,400 different cask samples before I chose what was going to be Shibui or not. And that was a good day. Joke. Okay, White Oak, what do you think?
Yeah, no, incredible.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
I really like the Virgin Oak. I mean, I liked the bourbon, but the Virgin Oak, I think there's a little more wood influence because of the virgin cask, and I really like what it does to the pump up the flavor a little bit.
Yep.
It's a great whiskey.
Thank you, Richard. We actually do a double stainless steel pot still distillation on this, so the ABV on this coming off the still is higher than the bourbon cask. And that means that it goes in and it bites out. When Charles, you're asking that question of how does it balance out? It balances out because we lift the ABV on it. So we actually get this up before we put it into oak, and that allows you to get the balance between spirit and wood, and it doesn't just become like chewing the back of a pencil, which is a very easy thing to do. Exciting news is obviously we have 3 10-year-olds. Like, you've just drank a 10-year-old pure malt, 10-year-old bourbon cask, 10-year-old white oak. I have enough of this whiskey that I might be moving it to a 12-year-old in the next year or two. So I would like to put a 12-year-old out there with this, because I think it's got the legs to do it. And it's different. Like, it is a different whiskey, but it's real pretty as well. So from what I've seen on the casks that we've laid down, I think it'd be a nice mix.
You may have already, sorry, I had to step away, but if you already answered this, let me know. But the stainless steel, us being massive Scotch fans, we all love worm tub condensers and this whole copper contact conversation and sulfur and all of this fun stuff. My dog just slammed his head into the table.
Is he drinking? He's done. Cut him
He
off.
could use a drink.
He said 5 whiskeys. No wonder he slammed his head into the table.
He needs 60% or above. But is rice just not as sulfurous as as barley?
You've nailed it, Holly. That's exactly correct. It's a really clean grain. We don't polish the rice. We don't do anything. We use the entire whole grain husk, all that fibrous stuff on the outside. We use everything. We're trying to create a flavoursome mash, but the mash that you get and the alcohol that you get is very, very clean for rice distillate. And that goes right across the board. I will say this. You can drink this. This is not my recommendation. Obviously, everybody should be drinking responsibly. You can drink half a bottle of this and still feel fine the next day, because it's a super clean alcohol. There's not a ton of congener in it. There's not a ton of impurity in it. So the distillation style, we don't need copper to remove that impurity. We don't need that interaction. What we need is a clean spirit. And by using stainless steel, we get that. That's the only reason we really use copper, to be perfectly honest with you, is we want to remove the impurities and go through that, like you said, that condenser process to get the spirit to taste the way it does in Scotland, and the way it does here as well in the States. We do plenty of that kind of style here. We don't have that for single grains. We use copper for our pure malt and our pure malt 10. That's double copper pot still distillation. We use continuous column still distillation for our grain select, and then we use stainless steel, either single or double stainless steel pot still distillation for our single grains. And we put all of that out there, and we tell you per whiskey what it is.
I got a question on the. So you mentioned that you don't do any polishing on the rice.
Yep.
You know, is Ohishi or Fukano doing polishing on their rice?
I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Is my honest about. I don't know, because again, they just don't put the information out there. I don't know. I don't think they have to, and it would surprise me if they did. But I don't know. Good question, though. It's worth an ask. Maybe we can get those guys on. And their whiskies are fantastic, by the way. I'll preface that.
I
don't know. Okay. Yeah. I love the fact that we're in great company, not just for rice whiskies, but just for Japanese whiskies. Like we are, we're new to the game, but we're a new brand, but we're not new to the business or the game. So, we can put out, oh, great catch, Matt. The 15-year-old is darker than our 18-year-old. Dum, dum, dum. Want to know why? Because we are natural coloured whiskies. And even though these two whiskies are from different distilleries, first and foremost, so I'll start there. The 15-year-old is from Masahiro Distillery, which is where our White Oak 10-year-old is from. Our 18-year-old is from Kumison Distillery, which is our youngest distillery, built in 1952. They are both matured in sherry cask, but we do not use Oloroso sherry. We're using Fino and Manzanilla sherry. Now, Fino is the driest white wine in the world. Manzanilla is the exact same thing, but from a different part of Andalusia. So obviously Fino is from Jerez de la Frontera. Then you've got Manzanilla, which is exactly the same style of wine, but it's on the coast, right on the water. The bodegas are actually right on the harbour front, and they just are there for 80 years, 90 years, 120 years. And those sherry barriques and barrels are just soaking up salt air coming in from the coast. So the actual wines that come out, if you actually go and buy Manzanilla wine, it's not expensive, costs you $12 a bottle. It's salty. It's a salty style of wine. And that means that when we use it to mature our whiskies, and you get that salinity coating that just lifts everything. Imagine like adding sea salt over it. Have you ever had a steak or a potato with no salt or butter? It is the worst thing you could ever eat. It's garbage. The minute you add salt or butter to a steak or to potatoes, and there's a reason that food in steakhouses taste so good, is because you drip it in butter, is because that salinity lifts the umami. It lifts all the other flavor profiles. And that's what happens in these whiskies as well. It just brings everything else to the forefront. For our 18-year-old, we use refill Manzanilla and refill Fino sherry casks. For our 15-year-old, we do a double stainless steel pot still distillation, and we use first fill Fino and first fill Manzanilla. And because we believe in barrels over bullshit and we're natural colour, our 15-year-old is darker than our 18-year-old. There you go, Matt. You're welcome. Great catch, though. Good eye, and saves me. It's like I almost peppered you with that question beforehand. I don't need to throw it in there. I'm actually looking for the 15-year-old. Did I kill the bottle? I was doing pour downs earlier, so I'll grab it a little bit here.
I assume he's in his shop, not his home.
That's actually a good question.
I mean, if he's in his home,
Is that your home or your shop?
This is my office. I don't have a shop. Honestly, I'm a big fan. I'm not even joking.
Where's your shop? I want to come over to Morristown.
I don't have it. This is just me hanging out at home. This is my home office. I have Nikas. I drink. This is great Nika, and I love my Japanese whiskies, so there's some other nice stuff here, but I drink all the competitors too.
What's
So
your
this-
favorite Scotch whiskey
The next one,
right now? What's your
the
favorite
next,
Scotch?
the next one.
It's not Scotch. Oh, the next one. Okay. You have to have, you can love a distillery at the moment and it can change.
I'll tell you, my heart has always been with these. I love Glenrothes. I think Glenrothes Distillery is one of the best distilleries I have ever spent time in. I think their back catalogue of rare whiskies is about to bowl over the world over the next 30 years. I think every time you buy an entry-level whiskey or a high-end whiskey, it is exceptional in its quality. I love Benriach, I love Glendronach, I love Highland Park. I love, what else? Even I tell you what, I love Glenmorangie. I love some of the stuff coming out of Glenfiddich as well right now. Some of the new stuff is really exciting and new fun. What else have I got that's been pretty cool? I've got a few Dalmores back here. I've been drinking.
You seem to be leaning to the sherry side.
A little bit. I've got plenty of other kind of slightly peated stuff, and I think I've got some Redbreast 15. I've got some really nice bourbons that I've picked up of late. But from a Scotch side specifically, because that was the question, even like some cigar malt Dalmore, King Alexander Dalmore. I love Balvenie. I picked up a bottle of 21-year-old Madeira cask Balvenie. Most people know the Portwood, but they actually do a 21-year-old Madeira cask, which is insane. Travel retail. What else did it? I got another couple. I got an Aberlour.
What's your favorite independent bottler?
Oh, I mean, Gordon and MacPhail have the best selection of size and scale, but I've had some absolute zingers from Singletary. Yeah, what did I pick up? These guys, Signatory. I picked up a Mortlach 1991
Perfume bottles. Yeah,
one of those ones. But it was a single cask. Fucking, it's cask strength.
Yeah, those are all single.
I'll probably throw it away. It's cask strength, Don't really drink that stuff. Just wanted to see if John was paying attention.
I think you can throw it this way.
No,
I'll stop by and get it.
add some Coca-Cola to it. You'll be good.
Hey,
Exactly.
hey, Vinny, he's giving you a run for your money. You gotta get a third tier on your setup.
Well, what you see behind me is only a small, because I can't fit it all in the bar. I have cabinets full of stuff. I think I'm up to over 300 bottles by now. Getting there.
You should see my shop.
Yeah, I'm not competing with you, Charles. I can't even get there.
That's a night out.
All right. We're on the 15. Are we talking 15 right now?
15
I
right
wanted
now,
to
yeah.
ask Nicholas a random question.
Sure.
It's a very random question. You've been talking a lot about Japanese and their skill at blending. Have you, and you mentioned that you got some bourbons on your shelf there. Have you had a chance to taste James Beam's Legent, which is a Kentucky distillation with the Japanese blender?
I have not. Is it good?
I like it, yeah.
What was the price point on that?
It's only about,
It used to be 39, but they just.
it's like 50.
Okay. That's good value.
It's reasonable. It's very, it's James Beam, I'm sure mass produced.
But is it different because somebody from Japan's had their hands on it?
I think it might be, yeah. I mean, I would have been curious to hear your thoughts. I don't consider myself a educated palate necessarily, but yeah, I think it's quite good. I think it's incredible value. Let's put it that way.
What's it called, John?
Legent.
Oh, Legend. Yeah. Okay, got it.
But I mean, part of their shtick is they brought in this, famous Japanese blender.
Shinji Fukuda.
Yeah, that's part of the whole, Suntory, Jim Beam world stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's their parent. Miss Holly noted.
Shinji Fukuyo. Fukuyo.
Okay.
Does that name ring a bell?
He's probably one of the blending teams for Suntory, I'd imagine.
Yeah. Anyhow, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to distract you.
I don't know him personally, but But I can only imagine seen Beam Suntory, so I'd imagine if it was one of those guys, and they would have brought in somebody from. So the guys that own Jim Beam also own Suntory. So
And they must subscribe to the concept that Japanese know how to blend.
well, they do very much so, and I'm sure what we'll start to see moving into the future is a lot more kind of Japanese oak coming to the States. Like some of the stuff that we're working on, like without giving too much away, like I want to. There are no boundaries for me, as you've probably worked out very quickly on every aspect of my life. I do not have boundaries, so I don't see. I almost like I love guys like John Glazer because I just think he kind of went, why are we doing this just because somebody's always done it? Like what if we did it different? Well, that's not Scotch whiskey. Well, fuck you then. We'll call it something else. But is it good? Like I love that attitude. Like just like I don't care what you call it. And excuse my language, I apologize. I do speak the Queen's English. If the Queen had Tourette's syndrome, so sorry about that. But it's the same thing. Like what is it that we like? What is it that we want to do? We want to be right, or do we want to be happy? So like, so many people just want to tell you how right they are, and I'm like, yeah, but was the whiskey good? Was it fun? Was it different? Was it interesting? I don't care if you call it Scotch. I don't care if you call it Japanese. We'll always call it whiskey. But did you like it? Was it interesting? Was it different?
This 15 and the 18 to follow, you've never tasted anything like it before, ever. So
the 15, not to get us back on kind of boring task, but the 15 is spectacular.
I'm glad you like it, Richard. 15 is one of my favorite whiskeys I've ever had. Yeah. And that is the end of that sentence. But I just love it. So I'm glad you guys enjoy it too. It's not for everybody, like any whiskey, but I hope you enjoy it.
I don't think I've ever tasted anything like it. It really was truly unique. Very
I may have to buy this one.
I'm glad you guys like it.
When are you going to stock Charles's store?
He's a man. He's already on it.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Taking care of it. So
we brought in, most of these last few bottles through the store. So I'll send an email out to everybody if anybody wants to add to our next order. So
we also have a little bit of a rare cask reserve 30-year-old left in market, and we also have a pre-sale going on right now. Charles, I'm sure you've heard of it, maybe not, of a 23-year-old rare cask reserve. Comes from the same distillery as our 18-year-old, and it's both whiskies are really exceptional.
We didn't hear about that, so that's pretty exciting.
Yep. So I want to try and do a rare cask reserve at least once every year, if not every 2 years. But you'll see right now there's a little bit of 30-year-old left in the market. We bottled everything in its entirety. So once it's gone, it's gone. And I kind of hate doing that. Like I always like saying that we want consistency. For some of the single grain stuff, it's just is what it is. That once we see a packet of something that we love, I'm all over it. And sometimes that's just it. Like we just don't have enough to make like any more than what we've got, and there'll be about an 8 years gap between getting up to another 30-year-old. But we do have a 23-year-old that we'll release later this year. And if you want any of it, yeah, speak to your southern rep. But we can put some of that aside for you as well. It's beautiful. It's all like engraved bottling and stuff as well. It's really a bit of a wow factor. I might even have a picture of it.
What's the maturation curve, would you say, of when you should start to get nervous about being over oaked with rice whiskey? Like when Scotch gets over 19, 20 years old, I'm starting to really look at the cask type to make my decision. Like and bourbon obviously is much younger and we know the cask type, but like what's that bell curve, would you say?
So I've had rice whiskies at 35 and almost up to 40 year, and they're still banging, and I don't know why. I don't know why. Chemically I know why, but I'm always shocked of how balanced they are. Even our 30-year-old, and The reason I think a 30-year-old is so balanced is we pride ourselves on multi-cask maturation. So we're moving whiskies around, like we're marrying whiskies together, at least is a better way to explain it, right? So when you've got like something that's maybe super oaky, but you balance it off with something that's super fruity, or you can lift and play it around in that marriage of multi-cask maturation, then the final outcome can still be exceptional. And I think that to me, again, comes back to the blending teams and the creation of what we're looking to do. Our 30-year-old was bourbon cask, Oloroso sherry, Manzanilla, Fino, and a little bit of virgin white oak in that as well. And it was just banging, like it's just stupid. And the 23-year-old is incredible. Like it's incredible. And like as we grow as a brand, you know, we always want our packaging to improve and do other things. So we're doing that. You know, our first release of whiskies, we wanted to actually release quite traditionally, and then change the packaging and do things like almost every year. So it'd be an updated version of something cool and trendy and funky and whatever. And our teams in Japan caught wind that our design team are looking at changing the packaging every year. And like, can you just get to the end? What do you want it to look like once you're done? So the new packaging that you start to see come through is a little bit more of a jump away into kind of brighter colors and some kind of funkier stuff. But that was really just to kind of bring people on that journey with us. Like we know what we're doing is unique, and you know, a group of Scottish, American, working so hand in glove with our teams in Japan. Like Charles said before, one of the questions was how did we come to be? It took us 2 years just to get to know our distilleries before we even talked about doing stuff. Just drinking their whiskies and speaking to them and getting them to know who we are and what our backgrounds were and why we could be trusted. And things in Japan just they're not like, cool, here's a business transaction, we've got the money. They don't care, they don't need the money. That is not the negotiation. They want to know, like, is it
a relationship?
100%. It's 100% really. And I remember the first time I ever went out to Japan, I worked for Edrington Group. So I worked for Macallan, and Macallan actually worked with Suntory. So the distributor in Asia is Suntory. Suntory owned 25% of Edrington and owned 20% of Macallan as a brand. And I was like, I don't know, that might be news to you guys as well, but I was like, wow, I actually didn't know that until relatively recently. But at the time I'd gone out and I was with all the kind of senior bigwigs of Suntory in Asia that come out and met us. And the Edrington Group CEO of Asia had just told me that they'd been trying to get contracts signed for about 3.5 weeks with Suntory, and it'd taken a lot. Like they'd brought them out and things, they were trying to take them stuff. And the VP of Suntory is a guy called Dienissimo, and his nickname was Dice. And this is the first time I'd ever been out to Japan, and I happened to have cufflinks on that were a gift, and they were tiny little cubic dice. And somebody noticed them, and then Dice was like, "Oh, my nickname is Dice. That's so funny. You've got Dice cufflinks on." And we all went out getting very, very drunk. And at the end of the night, I just took my cufflinks off quietly and just gave them to him. And those are for you. You need to keep them. Like, your name's Dice. You need Dice cufflinks. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, the signed contract get pushed under the door of the CEO of Edrington Group's hotel room. And he came up to me the next morning and said, "I think one of the team saw that you gave your cufflinks away." That's the way that we do business out here. It's things like that that make the difference. And it's always stuck with me. And he replaced my cufflinks with a very, very, I think my cufflinks were cheap and cheerful, but he certainly gave me a really nice set of cufflinks to replace them. And but the story stuck with me, which was just like, how could these guys have been negotiating in good faith for like 3.5 weeks? But it just takes just somebody just being honestly be like, this is how we are. You know, I'll give you the shirt off my back. Once they see that kind of behavior, that means the world to them. And honestly, we operated almost in just good faith. Like we have contracts signed and we have things in place, but really those are not the ties that bond us. What bonds us is are we good for our word, and do we stand by what we say we're going to do, and do we respect their distilleries, the way that we produce our brand and the way that we speak and the way that we conduct our business. And as long as you do those things and it feels like an extended representation of how they would act, then they're all in.
Yep. No, that's what I've experienced in Japan as well. And, you know, they're highly respectable to people who, are willing to be honest and truthful and all of that, and it's great. Wonderful people. So yeah, this 18-year umami bomb, mushroom galore,
Correct.
beautiful dram. It's quite, truffles, like Vince says, sauteed in butter. There you go.
There you go.
Even though, you don't probably need to saute truffles in butter. You just shave them right on, and depends where the truffles come from, I guess. But yeah, this is beautiful dram. I remember when we tried it with Alex, I'd never had anything ever that tasted like that. So pretty phenomenal. So
I love that. That sentence just blows my mind, Charles, because think of how many whiskeys you've drank.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. It's interesting because you think of rice whiskey and as its own category, and obviously Holly and I are really passionate about it at this point and trying to build this niche that nobody still knows about. But it is, in a way, it doesn't even taste like whiskey. I mean, it is whiskey. But it's so, you can't compare it to anything, you can't say, oh, well, that's got a hint of this or that. I mean, it is its own unique world. But I think that's what's great about it. At the same time, it is an oak, it is distilled spirit, it's not barley, but it is incredible, and it's very tasty and fun. So maybe we're at the cutting edge of a new category that will blow up. Like, we just brought in a month ago or so a barrel of light whiskey, and light whiskey is not something that most Americans have heard about. It's a very small category, and now there's all this buzz, and it's some pretty incredible whiskey as well. And I feel that way about rice whiskey too, that it's going to have its day. It's just people need to get there, and maybe we're on the cusp of that happening, and fortunate to be in that place. And so
I think so, Charles. I think you've nailed it, which is, this to me is, if you take out the influence of the Western world, what does Japanese whiskey look like? It's like, if you look at the world of every whiskey being a stepping stone process, the Japanese would have got there had one guy not gone to Scotland and then said, this is not Japanese whiskey. So to me, this is the grain of Asia, distilled exclusively, from sacrificed and fermented in a way that only the Japanese were experts at doing. Distilled and matured in a way that could only happen in a subtropical climate like Okinawa, and give you a flavor like what you've got in that glass. There is no way in God's earth we could do this in Scotland. And that to me makes us more, this makes this more Japanese. This is more Japanese whiskey than anything else I had ever had in my life. That's it. Like, you do it like that, that's it, right? That's the point of the agriculture shaping the whiskey of the land.
Oh, good old Chad. Not bad for an Italian boy.
I'll have that put on my gravestone. Thanks for that, Chad.
A little better than limoncello, let me tell you.
If you don't mind, I want to forward that quote to my mother, who still doesn't understand what I do for a living. Like, how do you make it? How do you make money out of this? What are you doing here?
And
what is your beer of choice that you've been drinking?
I turned the label around. It's a Kirin Shiman. Actually, so my beer of choice, my beer of this, somebody brought this over to the house the other day, but my actual beer of choice, if you've ever had it, is Orion, which is a rice beer from Okinawa. And if you have not had Orion, Charles, Holly, go out of your way to hunt it down. There are only 2 places in the entire state of New Jersey that sell it, 2 locations that sell it. And I need to buy it and order up by 5 cases at a time. But it is fantastic. It's just super clean, just again, rice alcohol, but it's a perfect Pilsner and it's all 100%, brewed in Okinawa and then exported out. So they've not licensed the beer name out to another bigger group. So it really all comes in from Okinawa.
Nice.
And if you can get it comes in cans or it comes in big bottles, buy the big bottles because you need it in the big bottle.
Did I understand from earlier that the only way you can get rice to ferment is by adding enzymes to it?
So yeah, effectively rice doesn't generate enzymes the way that barley does. So you can do two things. You can add another cereal. You can add barley, malted barley into the process, and that will kickstart things off. Or wheat or some other cereal that generates enzymes that we can use to convert starch to sugar. Or you can, in Canada, they just add liquid enzymes. They don't just like put in liquid enzyme. In Japan, we use Koji. So Koji is used. It's used for sake. It's used for sochu. It is the Japanese way to generate enzymes.
So what is Koji though? Like
it is fungus.
Fungus. Okay.
It's a type of fungus, and
Koji. Like how is that?
It's cultivated. So here's the best thing. All Koji strains lead to Okinawa indigenous black Koji, but the majority of Koji that's used in the industry will be white or yellow Koji, which is cleaner, easier to work with, faster to produce, and all these other things. And you cultivate it, right? So you create it like a fungus. But in Okinawa, the indigenous Koji is the original Koji strain is black Koji. And if you look at like sake or sochu, they'll use predominantly, and even other rice whiskies will use yellow or white Koji. In Okinawa, which used to be part of the Ryukyu Kingdom, that is the Koji of choice, and it is the Koji of where it all began. So it's pretty cool. It's used for a billion different things. Like it's phenomenal at what it does. It's the most efficient thing that you could ever use to saccharify a grain. And I do not know why we still go through a malting process in Scotland, having now seen the wonders of what Koji can do. And it just produces different flavors. So to me, there's a home for it, not just in Japanese production. I would love to see other parts of the world playing with it and seeing what they can come up with.
I have a question.
Certainly.
It's going to be probably ridiculous, but my good friend who I do trips and tours with in Japan just attended the Tokyo Whiskey Festival the last couple of days. And is Shibui something that could even be shown at the Tokyo Whiskey Festival, or is it really purely just the United States?
So the girls are based out in California, so we're a California-based business.
Okay.
I'm based in the East Coast. Our goal was what we saw happening in the United States was twofold. All the age statements dried up and the prices for non-age statements went through the roof.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
But my question is though, if you're not, why wouldn't the Japanese be all over this? Like if you have that opportunity, right? Where maybe it's not the rest of the world, but maybe it's just Japan and the United States. Like why?
So we have already
kind of Holly talking about, rice whiskey being something that's known outside of Japan more than it is within Japan. I mean, why? Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm trying to understand why they wouldn't be crazy about this as well.
I don't get it either. And we've been asked to sell, like the minute we won all the awards and accolades that we won at San Francisco at IWSC, at Ultimate Spirits Challenge, the minute we blew up from that side of things and turned up in Forbes magazine and all these other great things, great publicity considering we don't have a PR team. And the minute we got all that kind of excitement, like the phone didn't stop ringing. So China wanted a Shibui, Japan wanted Shibui, Philippines wanted Shibui. Pretty much every country in Europe was like, hey, you guys got an importer here? Do you want to bring in blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't that we couldn't do it. First and foremost, we're in 33 states in the United States.
Why not Japan?
Because I'm going to get there, Charles.
Sorry.
So we're in.
If they're calling you, I would be.
I'll tell you why. Because we're in 33 states. This year, we are a just under 30,000 physical cases, right? I have never in my life ever worked on a brand that's gone from 0 to 30,000. When I moved from Scotland to the United States in 2010, Balvenie was at 30,000 cases and they'd been here for 15 years. So we're a 30,000 case brand here in the USA. And we have 6 people that work in our company. So I can't get Philadelphia to do the shit that I want it to do. I ain't going to take on Japan yet. We'll get there. And I guarantee you, we will get there. I want to win in the USA. I want us to get our brand in 50 states in the USA. I want us to be the brand of choice. I want us to continue to eat the lunch of all the Japanese whiskey companies that think that they're too good to work, that the relationships that they need to own the business and to earn the trust of the consumers here for the price points that they're willing to charge. I will eat their lunch all day long. And then when we're good and ready and we've taken care of all our business at home, then we can look to expand. But right now we're a US-based company. We have amazing distillery partnerships in Japan. I'd rather sell here while those other companies are not. It's a false economy. There's not enough whiskey. Only 15% of what's produced by those big guns is what's coming into the USA. Right. So they want to sell exclusively in Japan. Could I sell in Japan tomorrow? Absolutely, no questions asked. Do I want to? All it would do is make my job more difficult to keep the things that I've said we want to do in the States right now, which is to build our age statement whiskies out, to give amazing core range non-age statement whiskies into the market, and make sure that we can continue to put them into the United States without telling people, hey, if you want to get a bottle of this, you need to buy 10 pallets of this. Like, I have no interest in playing that game. So for us, the USA is my #1 priority because it's not the #1 priority for the biggest players in the Japanese whiskey world. Fine.
Nicholas, sell
Yes,
it
sir.
to the USA.
That's it. That's all I want to do, man.
Yeah.
That's it. Sell the USA.
All right, we're coming on. We're a little over 2 hours. This has been a
Holy
great
shit.
tasting.
Sorry, guys.
No, this is fantastic. This is what the Whiskey Club is all about. We love tastings like this where we can, shoot the shit and really get down to the real nitty gritty. And I'm sure Alex probably warned you a little bit that we were above his head a little bit with some of the questions we were asking him,
which I love.
Saying, well, Nicholas will tell you, and here we are. So this is why we're here. But
he's a sweetheart. He's a great guy.
This is super fantastic. Really, Nicholas, I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm going to stop the recording. If people want to stay, they can stay for sure. But I do want to thank you before we do close the recording. Graciously, this has been a really fantastic tasting. I think all of us have learned a lot, which is really what the club is all about. And new categories always come out and make us think differently about all of this. So thank you, Alex and Nicholas, for bringing this to us, and really appreciate it. We will stay on here. I just wanted to do that since we're at 2 hours long.